Alright, lads, the best matchmaker is back in the business, and after a big, huge main card full of KOs, I mean, we had like 4 in a row. I thought we were about to have card of the year, but then, yeah, mate, the main and co-main both kind of sucked. If I'm being honest, both great displays of skills and technique, but we can all admit that, look, these fights didn't exactly jump us out of our seats. That's okay though, because I plan on matchmaking, letting you guys know which fights should be made in order to bring both skill but also entertainment back. Because we have great technique, we can have great technique with more entertainment. In today's video, I'm going to specifically talk about welterweight because welterweight's in season right now. 3 of the 5 fights on the main card, UFC 322, were welterweight fights. Belal versus Ian Garry just happened at the time of recording this, and the division is stacked at the moment. We have a new champ, new rankings, so let's go through and break this division down to figure out who our next big contender is going to be. Now, as always, do feel free to let me know what you guys liked and disliked for what I have to say in this video. Maybe you love my matchups, maybe you don't love my matchups, maybe you think someone else should face Islam, let me know. Maybe you guys enjoyed the co-main and main events of UFC 322. Maybe you guys loved it and I'm wrong. All is fair in love and war. But now let's get into matchmaking these fights, because I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. Now look, here are the most likely next big welterweight contenders that are in the mix for the title challenger position. Here are the ones that I'm going to name. These are the ones that we're going to be matchmaking. So we have Ian Garry, Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, Shavkat Rakhmonov, and Kamaru Usman. Before it even comes to topic, no, I don't think Topuria should be the next welterweight title challenger. Yes, I do think the biggest fight the UFC can make is Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria, the first fight with 2 double champions. However, I do think that it's the worst possible timing for that to happen. Think about it, both of these dudes just became champions of their divisions. They've both moved up and they haven't defended their belts once yet. They should fight their contenders, especially for Ilia, who's only ever had 1 title defense, practically abandoning the featherweight, practically abandoning the featherweight division. I just don't want to see him abandon this division too. 3 division champ doesn't mean much if none of those belts are really defended, because it's not like he has to work his way up to each division. Plus, even if I did think Ilia was ready, I don't really want to see him at 170. Unlike Pereira, who could probably go up and I could see him as a heavyweight, becoming a 3-time champ, I don't see Ilia as a welterweight. He's 5'7", most welterweights are 6 feet at least. Plus, Islam would have such a big weight advantage. Islam is the right size for a welterweight. He only gets stronger in his striking and wrestling with the move up, where I think welterweight would be too much of a move up for Topuria, and you'd get more of like a Zhang Wei Li situation where she's going up too much and the weight's going to really hit them once, the opponent comes forth. And Islam, with his wrestling style, would show that. He could have his impacts in speed and trouble with his smaller frame. If we're going to see the best fight, let's see them at their best. I don't want to see that fight at welterweight because I think Islam would dominate Ilia there. However, I think if it was at lightweight, the fight would be much more competitive and really, really interesting. So I don't think it's fair for Ilia to get the shot at the third belt after not really earning the double champ spot in the first place, nor do I think he should. So let's focus on the contenders we do have at welterweight. First and foremost, before anything, I do have to give props where props are due and credit where credit is due, because both Michael Morales and Carlos Prates were not on my radar for who should be getting the belt next. These 2 guys came in as, look, Carlos Prates wasn't an underdog. Michael Morales was an underdog, I feel like, against Brady. But I didn't expect neither of these guys to have such dominant performances that they'd be able to be like, look, Islam, we're coming. Both of these guys called out Islam Makhachev. I didn't have either of these guys on my radar for the title. So fair enough to both of them. Credit where credit is due. Now, Michael Morales has 2 ranked wins now, both first round KOs. I just recently found out that the bloke weighs like 200 pounds outside of camp, so he's definitely a weight bully. Now, it probably factors into how he's able to do such nasty work in the division. But look, after this Brady win was big. Brady had just beat Edwards in dominant fashion. Obviously, after what we saw Prates do to Edwards, that's not as big now, but still, amazing win for Morales. However, I want to see one more. He's great, don't get me wrong. This guy's a talent with 19 wins. In a maybe less stacked division, he'd be getting the title shot off of this, but he still needs to build a bit more. But with one more win, I think he's definitely in there for a shot. He's never lost, and yeah, never lost, undefeated, a bit of a big name. I didn't really know too much about Michael Morales in terms of everyone on the card. I was probably the least knew about him the most because he hasn't really been around for too long. I just knew that he was a knockout artist, great finisher, undefeated. But he's got a bit of, the Ecuadorian fan base do really like him. So he's making a bit of a name for himself, Spider-Man over here. Now who do I think this should be? Well, I think he should fight down, similar to what they wanted out of Brady, but with a bigger matchup and name. Give us Michael Morales versus Kamaru Usman. Now listen here and let me explain. In my ideal scenario for now on, if you're going to be fighting for a belt, especially as a striker, you got to be able to be hit with multiple high-level wrestling tests beforehand. Because we can sit here being mad at Hamzat and Islam for their boring performances, but it's also in large part due to the lack of ability on the ground from their opponents. And in all fairness, a lot of these guys I've listed have proven that they have strong ground game, such as Ian Garry with Shavkat, Usman with Shamaev, and Carlos Prates a little in the Ian Garry fight, although he did get taken down by Leon. However, Usman just ragdolled Buckley on the ground for 5 rounds. I want to know if he can do that to Morales, because if he can't, then you have my attention, Spider-Man. But now also looking at Usman, former champ, he's always talks about how he's a former pound for pound number one. Usman's ego is insane. He really does think he'll be getting the next title shot off of 3 losses and 1 win against Buckley. No, no way, buddy. Ali Abdulaziz can try and get Islam to convince us, but it's not going to happen. You can't convince us that this is an interesting fight. Former champs can't just step back in for the title shot more than once just because they were dominant. He lost to Leon, fair enough, give him the immediate rematch. But then he lost that rematch, and then he lost to Hamza. That's a 3-fight losing streak. Beating Buckley, who was 7th at the time, does not make you the top contender again. We have a long line of guys, and Usman can't just walk in with 1 win and surpass all of them just because what he used to be. Plus, the UFC dropped this man down 3 spots to 8th in the rankings. So I don't believe they'd do that if they wanted him next. I mean, look at Paddy Pimblett, who went from 8th to 5th with no fights. I know the UFC says that the media controls all that and it's not them and whatnot, and partially that's probably true, but if they were setting up Usman as the next thing with Paddy Pimblett where they could give him the shot, they'd boost him up the rankings, not drop him down the rankings. However, even though I was originally thinking Usman versus Belal or Usman versus Shavkat, Usman thinks he's too big time for Belal, who already has a matchup. He already just had that matchup with Ian. And I think Usman versus Shavkat would probably be too much of a rightful number one contender matchup, if you know what I mean. The matchmakers seem to put guys very close to the title shot against dudes who aren't necessarily as close to kind of see how each guy who is close to the title performs. Not only winning, but excitingly, with whoever doing the best being the next likely challenger. I think this is because number one contender matchups are always a major risk. Because if the winner doesn't have a dominant performance, it doesn't really feel like they'll secure a win against the champ, leaving people less excited. So I could see a winner of a Morales Usman being a top contender for the belt, while you can still have other people coming around and possibly doing better, but these two would put on a fire show for a title fight, depending on who won in this matchup. Usman hasn't fought since June. We're coming on 6 months since he last fought. Someone needs to tell this guy he needs one more. He's not going to be next off of the Buckley win. I don't know why I keep thinking that. It's been 6 months, man. Morales just came off of a quick KO with little to no damage taken. This can be run pretty quickly, January to March, come time for Islam's return, which will most likely probably be around June. Islam's never majorly active, and if they fight in March, the winner would have like a 3-month turnaround. If too damaged, there are other contenders, which is why you always got to build those other matchups. But Usman, considering he hasn't fought in the last 6 months, and considering Morales got a very quick early win with no damage taken, you could make this matchup very soon, and they would be able to turn around fast enough for Islam's return. So look, I'm already, I'm making some things. We're making some moves, and you can't tell me Usman. He's coming off of those losses, but then he got that one back. He's on the win streak again. He needs to extend that to get the title shot, but he has to go to this young, hungry bull in Michael Morales, wrestling versus the KO striking power, the same type of power that he got hit with Leon Edwards' head kick. You can see the storyline coming into place. You can see the excitement behind that matchup. You can't tell me that if that matchup wasn't made, you wouldn't be like, damn, I'm excited for this one. I want to see, Michael Morales. He's undefeated, yeah. He's gone through the ringer a little bit, but he's never gone to put it in there with a guy like Usman. Let's see if he can really face the true test in Kamaru Usman. And for Kamaru Usman, let's see if he can beat this undefeated guy and show that he still has it, and he's going to be able to go in there with a guy like Islam. So I kind of killed two birds with one stone with that matchup. But now let's go back and, move back on to Carlos Prates. He's one of those guys that's coming off of a loss. He just recently lost to Ian Garry, which is always iffy to me because I'm never huge on guys with recent losses going in against champs like Makhachev who haven't lost for 10 plus years. Ian Garry has the same thing with his loss to Shavkat. Neither of them lost, obviously, in their last fights, but in their last 3 or 4 or so fights, they have a loss. And look, if you lose to a contender, you got to show improvement before then going to fight the champion. Because you're already behind in the sense that they're the champion. They're supposed to be the best in the division. You got to show them that you can be the best. And how are you going to show a guy that, hasn't lost for 10 plus years that you're the best when you only recently just lost? So you obviously need to show improvement to prove that that's not going to happen again. Now, Ian Garry was a better fighter that night all around. To be fair, Prates did stuff almost every single takedown with ease. He had the bigger moments near the end, but he never really capitalized to get the finish. And it's not like his challenges since then have been the highest level either. Edwards was great, but isn't anymore, and Jeff Neal is a gatekeeper. I think Ian Garry is the best guy Prates has ever fought, but he lost to him. And I do have other plans for Ian Garry. So I only see 1 or 2 names for Prates that really work. Now, I know I said give all these guys talented grapplers, but I think Prates has proved he can hang with grappling. Obviously not high tier grapplers, but look, we'll ignore that for a bit. I want to see some fun. Let's run. Hear me out with this. I think this one will be good for you. I think you guys will enjoy this one. Carlos Prates versus Jack Della Maddalena. You can't tell me that this one isn't one of the most entertaining striking matchups you can make in the UFC, not even just in this division. This is like Royval versus Van type of stuff with this fight. Both dudes are going to go in and they're going to attempt to land the better shots faster than the other. JDM is obviously going to need, some practice in the grappling, and he's going to need to go through the ringer again. But he's gonna need to have a couple more before getting a title shot again. We don't need to rush this. We have time for a banger matchup, especially if if Makhachev's still gonna be the champ, he probably won't get a title shot for a while. So he's gonna have time for a banger matchup with a guy like Carlos Prates. He just had like 3 wrestling matchups in a row. He had Islam, he had Belal, and he had Gilbert Burns all trying to take him down. He won 2 of those 3. So we can see a striking matchup. It's going to be an entertainment. And look, if Carlos Prates wins this too, he's literally just beat the former champ. So that's going to send him as well. Sure, he probably still needs some of that. Like, yes, I know he has great takedown defense. He did get taken down by Leon Edwards. So that would scare me in a matchup with Makhachev. But I think beating JDM would be massive for him to go in and try and grab himself a title shot. So I think everyone in the mix so far are almost there. Everyone pretty much needs around 1 or so wins. I think everyone honestly 1 more win and they could be in a title shot. But now it just comes down to 2 names. Ian Garry and Shavkat Rakhmonov. These are the 2 guys right now who I won't say necessarily need any more fights before going into a title shot, especially for Ian Garry after this last win. But even for Shavkat, I think it's going to be between them for who gets the next shot. Shavkat is obviously the undefeated guy. Every win but 1 is a finish, and he only really has. Look, Shavkat, yes, undefeated. Almost every single win is a finish. He does have a win over Ian Garry, but he only really does have 2 wins against current ranked opponents. Whilst if we're looking at Ian Garry, he's got 4. And that's not including MVP, who was sort of pushed out of the division. On top of that, Shavkat's second last win was in December of 2023, whilst Ian Garry's was in April of this year. Dude, Shavkat Rakhmonov has been extremely inactive. Obviously, he's been injured. Apparently, he's had to have multiple surgeries. I don't know 100% what is going on. But by no means am I an Ian Garry fan. But look, even before the injuries and the surgery, he was still fighting like once a year. I do believe Shavkat would give Islam a harder fight than Ian. But I think even though Shavkat beat Ian, after his performance against Belal, I think Ian kind of deserves a shot more. I think Shavkat has to do more now that he's been out for so long. When he was the number 1 contender, Belal was still champ. Since then, we've had 2 new champs. So I think it's a similar situation to what we just went through with Arman Tsarukyan. He's been out for too long. He should fight at least 1 more time. Now, if Shavkat is expected to be out for even longer, I do think Sean Brady could possibly line up for a matchup with him. Sean just got a brutal KO put on him. He'll be out for a little bit longer than, possibly usually would. And he already only really fights like twice a year. So, look, I mean, this guy still beat Leon in a dominant victory. He's still a talent. Don't count out Sean Brady yet just because he got that knockout loss. I think that a fight between him and Shavkat would be fairly interesting. Do I have Shavkat winning that? Yes, but I think it would be that challenge that he would need. Sort of like as I said before, like the Ahmed Sarukian thing, where it's not like Ahmed Sarukian just fought Dan Hooker. Sure, that isn't the biggest challenge compared to the fight that he had before with Charles Oliveira, but it's just to get him in there, get him warm again, and get him in the minds of the people before he goes and fights for the title. Now, it may be a bit of a scummy move to put Brady in there with an undefeated guy after just putting him in there with an undefeated guy in Michael Morales. So I can see as to why you wouldn't maybe want to do that fight then. In that case, maybe you do Prates versus Shavkat, so Prates does get that wrestling matchup. Or you do JDM, sorry, you do that fight, and you do JDM versus Brady. But I prefer the matchups the way they are, if I'm being honest. But that would work too. So that means Ian Garry would fight Islam. I think going into these last two events and their big welterweight bouts, it was between Ian Garry and Sean Brady, with whoever either winning or winning dominantly coming out on top, being the guy. And considering Brady lost, it was pretty much all in it was pretty much all in Ian's book. He had the layup. The basketball was thrown to him. All you got to do was just shoot it. Didn't need a three-pointer. All he had to do was just, the basketball references aren't hitting. But what I mean is he didn't have to do the craziest thing. He didn't have to finish Belal like he said he would, which he didn't end up doing. But he just needed to get that win. And look, he did decent enough with that win. It may have not been the most stylish thing, but it was well enough to the point where I think, I think that's enough. He's done enough. He just beat the former champ. Now look, now that I'm thinking about it, when was the last time Ian Garry finished a fight? May 2023 was Ian's last finish. So I guess we gotta hope that he can decision Islam Makhachev. Oh god, it's not looking good. It's not looking good. But to be fair, no one really likes Ian though, so I doubt if he lost, people would be really that upset. But look, I will say this. Yes, he talks a lot of shit. Yes, he calls his mate and former opponent for some reason, which is his mate, Carlos Prates, his son. When Prates and MVP both won in August, he posted pictures of him hitting them, calling them both his sons. His ego is off the roof. He even thinks he's better than Shavkat after losing and continuously brings up the fact that he destroyed Shavkat, even though he clearly lost. And look, he's annoying. I get why everyone hates Ian Garry, but I think that's smart. The promo for Ian Garry versus Islam Makhachev would go crazy. I think skill for skill, obviously Islam has shown he's better, but Ian Garry is skill for skill good enough to be in there with Islam. Plus, on top of that, you also got to think about the promotion. That's why you'd get like a fight like Ilya versus Paddy, because ultimately at the end of the day, this is an entertainment while also being a sport. And I think this one would entertain. First of all, for the first time ever in the UFC, since McGregor versus Habib, we'll have Ireland versus Dagestan again, which is easily marketable. Ian can talk and play the villain, which would ease in nicely with Islam now kind of getting the love from the fans he never seemed to really get before. It's a fun, marketable fight. Ian, I think, has the most ranked wins of any guy currently on a win streak in this division, maybe except for Usman. But Usman's the only guy Ian is the only guy who's done enough at this point. Let me know in the comments whether you liked my matchmaking or not. Let me know if you agree with Islam versus Ian Garry. And if not, let me know who you'd think instead. Maybe, chances are a lot of people are probably going to say Ilya. But if it's not Ilya and we're just talking about the current welterweight contenders, let me know if you think it's Prates, if you think it's Morales. Let me know. Let me know if you think it's Usman. I don't know why you'd say that. I think you might be stupid. But let me know. Alright? So, look. Like, subscribe the video. It will mean liking the video would mean a lot. Subscribe. I'm matchmaking after almost all these events. It would mean the world if you guys subscribed and came back day to day to check out what we were doing over here. And yeah, pretty much we're done.